Hey y'all, welcome to this week's episode of Race Kiki with Jonathan Lee. I'm Jonathan, but you already knew that. Anyway, this week I had the opportunity of chatting with a friend of mine by the name of Russ Lane. And Russ, Russ's family owned owns a plantation in South Carolina, and I needed to understand what what that felt like, and how he unpacks and negotiates that feeling, and that being that close to such a history. Anyway, you know what to do. Buckle up. It's going to be an incredible chat. Remember, we can't fix a problem we're afraid to talk about. May I present to you Russ Lane. Well, hey, Russ Lane, welcome to Race Kiki with Jonathan Lee.
Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing? You all right?
Oh, I'm blessed.
Good. Well, as I was saying before we were recording, you look fantastic. Whatever you've been doing, you keep all of that. Good for you.
Thank you very much. I've come a long way from 350 pounds 15 years ago. So
I'm sure that's a journey all in itself.
yes, yes, very much so. I mean, the quick about me, I mean, obviously there's what we're here to discuss. I was 350 pounds most of my life, and I lost 200 of it while food writing. And that took me to restarting life from scratch in New Orleans. And then I came up to New York and I did the same thing again. So it's definitely been transformation is something that finding a way anyway is sort of kind of a running theme, which is why I was really excited to have this conversation.
That's an amazing statement. Finding a way anyway. That's a really good mantra.
Well, I'll be honest, between personally with weight and my own history and reckoning with that, it's one thing to wallow in it, it's another to move forward anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was very blessed with excellent teachers. And so, it's kind of a good segue. One of my favorite teachers kind of began the mantra, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what or who anyone else does. What matters is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that has been put to the test many, many times,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally. And so it's pretty amazing to be here and doing cooking I'm proud of. And I've built a life for myself in New York that I never would have imagined 200 pounds ago.
Look, I've been here, I think I'm going into my 10th year. This is my ninth year in New York.
Mhm.
And in the journey here, it's been quite a treacherous, interesting, fantastic, ridiculous journey that I would not change for the world. Especially if I look back and remember the little black boy in Mississippi being toured around a plantation. Anyway, so I bring that up to ask you this question. When did you learn about race?
It's funny. That's something I've been giving a lot of thought. Like, when did that actually begin?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the reasons, one of the preambles for leading up to this is I am both someone who, our mother's family literally came from a plantation in South Carolina.
Okay.
So knee-jerk reaction to that question was, when have I not been aware of this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you're right. But it was an interesting question because you're right. There's always some point where that concept gets introduced. And, I've had to give that a lot of thought. And I actually believe it was school. Particularly looking at, the history of the South and the Civil War, like slavery,
Mm-hmm.
its role in plantations came up in that. And it was always it's a plantation in South Carolina, and the sharecropper houses are still up, and for the it's one of those, sorry, this is the New Orleanian kind of me. It's one of those laughs you don't cry things.
Mm-hmm.
Even a year
Mm-hmm.
ago, I mentioned, referencing as the plantation with the family, and it wasn't even taking a shot at anybody. It was just factual statement. They're like, it wasn't a plantation, it was a farm. I was like, the sharecropper house. I like, how? I was like, oh my, this is like the all white version of the past conversation of the past. Like, this is absurd. That was a definite moment. In school, once you learned, and then it was like, wait a minute, they're talking about my family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this isn't some concept out there somewhere. This is part of my heritage, which honestly made me feel like crap. That began very early, and then sort of mixed in with that. I'm gonna give you a bit of background. It's on the coast of South Carolina. It mainly raised soybeans and corn.
Mm-hmm.
They also raised hogs, I believe, horses at some point. I don't know if that one's fully accurate. That's kind of based on stories.
Okay.
And previous to growing up, that was somewhere we went every Thanksgiving and then every other summer for family reunion. And what was interesting to me about that is even before I had any sort of concept of race, much less, a lot of the things that people discuss now.
Mm-hmm.
It was never so much how they treated me. I was largely an afterthought, which sounds kind of horrible to say, but it was neither positive nor negative. I was I was born at a kind of a gap year of like waves of children. So I was kind of always out there on my own.
Okay.
It was as much about how they treated my father. My mother's family was, I would say, moderately wealthy to moderately wealthy. My father's family very much came from the other side of the tracks.
Okay.
And it was as much, he, not so much in my mother's generation, but particularly with the generation preceding it, he was essentially treated as the help.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of his function. So, he never had a very high opinion of my mother's family. As I got older, at first, even if it was a, very conservative father, you still sort of take the word of your father. As I got older, the, as I got older, in modern days, it was as much the absence of a discussion or awareness of racism, which particularly in that setting, even to me as a child, seemed insane.
Question.
Sure.
What year were you born?
1979.
Okay. Because I was watching a documentary right before our conversation today about the Jim Crow South.
Mm-hmm.
And well, namely, it was about Jim Crow and how it came about. And I had a revelation. Something just like clicked in my head right as I was watching this, and I realized that my parents and every person I know in my age group, you're somewhere in that window too. Their parents were born under Jim Crow. And depending on your relationship to the ruling class, if you will, no matter what the laws were, your family is going to continue to teach what they know. So that gave me an interesting context to all of the conversations that I'm having, namely with white folks.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of you guys can't pinpoint a time when you can remember learning about race. But if I ask you a different question, when did you learn about racism? Or even better, how did you learn about racism?
What's so interesting to me about that is how entwined the two are. Because you're right, there's a distinction in the question.
Mm-hmm.
You're really right. There's a huge distinction in the question. There's not in my brain.
Well, neither in mine. I think that they're intertwined subjects.
So and it's interesting. I mean, as I said, it wasn't really till I got a grasp of the history in school
Mm-hmm.
that I began to understand and sort of look back. I'm like, oh, okay. The let's see. But yeah, I mean, you were born. I was born in the Carolinas. You were born in Mississippi. There's a big
Mm-hmm.
in the South and the Deep South.
Well, there's the deep South is the deep. We are very particular in our racism, but I've been through all of the South, and the racism is quite the same. Northern Southerners, not deep, not I'm sorry, Northern Southerners, you closer to the Mason-Dixon line, like to differentiate yourself away from the racism of the deep South, but it is, as a living representation, it's the exact same. But go on about your statement.
Got it. Oh, that's interesting. My experience, like at its core, yes, they show up a little differently just from an outsider's perspective.
Mm.
I mean, for like to
As
let's
the observer, as you're witnessing racism, you're explaining.
looking
Got
at
it. Got it.
being
Okay.
first center of the storm is an entirely different story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I get that. Excuse me. Um, and so, I mean, that was really the racism as a concept. I mean, and before that, the preamble to all this was, what you learn from your family and what gets passed down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun. Talk about white privilege. I remember very distinctly when the more I read, I was like, okay, well then I'm kind of white privilege mother load. Like, I don't think you like being one generation removed and still visiting a plantation. I think that counts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would think so.
Yes.
But it was also when I actually look and see like how I was raised, it was, I think in modern days, it would be called that breed of almost infantilizing sympathy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, those poor people. And then, within that, the complete lack of awareness of how you contribute to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, growing up, the kind of concurrent with that, I mean, I've been referencing South Carolina. In North Carolina, where I was born, I was in comparatively in the environment a far more mixed crowd, both socioeconomically, in terms of race, in terms of gender,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean definitely was a blessing. And even more so, I was blessed with very, very excellent teachers. Because you're right, there are plenty of times where I literally, honestly didn't know any better.
I have a thought process behind that, and it's the theory is I'm certain that we all learn things from our families, and our families learn things from the people before them, and the people before them, and the people before them, without putting it into context in the life in which that person had lived.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So here we are in 2021, still with the same attitudes and mindsets of 1865-ish, because we've we've invented a world where we are so distanced away from one another. Even if we're in the same space, we could be in the same space, but we are so separated away from one another by design that we only have what the information we've been able to digest through the news, through the school we've gone through, to the education that we've been afforded to receive, um, dictates how we see the others that we come in contact with, and how much we see them as human and or worthy of humanity. Because if we take all of this into context and you say, okay, in 1865, when the slaves were emancipated, there were 400, there were 4 million enslaved Americans, newly enslaved Americans, newly freed Americans, with zero to their names, zero places to go, having set a path for this country for economic success, of which we all benefit from, but only one class of people reap the benefits from that investment. And the separate class of people, my folks, have the exact opposite reaction. And if you just follow the breadcrumbs and you're like, well, in 1865, this happened. And then we went through reconciliation, and then the white people are all like, oh God, no. But let's roll it back a little bit. In order for the Civil War to end, the Black folks had to just be considered as 3/5 of a person, which is why lots of the South has so much power in our government. And then we redline our neighborhoods and then put all the Black and brown people in these particular neighborhoods, and you say, you can't go here, to the white folks because it's dangerous. And then to the banks, you shouldn't invest here because these people are trash. And so the neighborhoods look like trash, but all of these Black and brown bodies that live in that neighborhood do all of the menial work for all of the white folks. So you don't mind us when we're working. Your issue comes when we're in recreation. Because how dare you think you are worthy enough to be in this space?
Recreation, can you run that by me again?
Yeah, recreational, Black in recreation. What I mean by that is when we as Black folks are working, like doing whatever it is that we do for a living, it is easier for a white person to digest what it is that we're doing. When we are just minding our own business, walking down the street, in a store, shopping, eating, what have you, that is generally when shit pops off. I can't tell you how many times I've just been recreationally shopping and people have come up and assumed that I work there. Now, at like a Bergdorf's, sure, that's, oh, look at you thinking, but at Target, how fucking dare you? And not that there's anything wrong with Target, but I'm generally not in a red top and khakis. I'm generally not wearing that.
Yeah.
So why would you assume I work there? Because it's generally confusing to see us in recreation because usually we're obstacles toward your end goal.
You're right. I don't lay claim to that. So no, I don't. And here's why.
Okay.
There was certainly how my father was treated. And it was interesting as I was reading through, it's not the same. But when I looked at how selflessly he gave and the sense of entitlement for his work, the differences, there are a hell of a lot. You don't need me to tell you that. But the delta wasn't quite as wide as we like to think it is in terms of how my father was treated. Because when I was reading about what sharecropping worked, I'm like, wait a minute, something's not right. I was like, check. I mean, I'm not even referring to myself. Check. I was like, something's not right here. Like it shouldn't, it's not the same, but I was a little surprised it was that similar. And then even beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for me, I mean, everything you're describing is dead on. When I was looking at myself, it was, you know, and this is as a child, it was, okay, where do I fit in all of this? And where do I want to fit in all this? Because, you know, I was morbidly obese. I was closeted gay. I was also pretty serious. There was definitely some bullying and a fair amount of abuse. So I didn't necessarily identify, I didn't really identify with any, I was kind of out there on my own.
Mm-hmm.
There was, because most of one would be considered white privilege. Yes, on paper, I looked that way. That wasn't how things worked in any kind of actuality. And then beyond that, this doesn't have anything to do with race per se, but do you remember that old show, Leave It to Beaver?
Yes.
There's a scene where Beaver, I remember watching this very distinctly. There is a scene where he had his best friend, and when the Beav's parents were there, he was poster child white privileged golden boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm using this term knowing what it means. When the second his parents were away, he just acted like trash. And I remember the visceral amount of disgust. It was funny. This like 1950s sitcom gave me disgust.
Okay.
And because I saw a lot of that play out in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. And so it was a question of okay, how to not be that.
How to
Particularly,
not be trash.
no, I mean, how to um, live your life honestly, because there's nothing to me more disrespectful than that turnabout face and performing
Mm-hmm.
a role. And the second it no longer serves you, a whole other side comes out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, it was and I mean, as that relates to this conversation, it was, you know, I was a little disgusted by it. I was certainly not approving of how my father was treated. Wasn't too much better for myself, but it wasn't even really about me. And then it becomes a question of, this is like a child's thing. I'm like, I don't necessarily think I can fix it, but like, there's got to be something I can do to make it better. So a lot of that was a combination of different things. I wanted to be not them. That might be the best way I could probably
Describe it. Okay.
and actually, in fair, it did not mean I did not have a lot to learn, God knows. And it did not, and I make them sound like the most horrible people on earth, and they're not. But at the end of the day, that wasn't who I wanted to be, and that wasn't anything I wanted to be part of. Now, that's a great desire, like how that actually works in the crisscross of cultural warfare. That's where it gets interesting.
It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work and effort to unlearn all of the things that we've been indoctrinated to learn in this country. And especially with your I'm so curious about these summer vacations on the plantation. This is very curious. My origin story, I alluded to it earlier, but again, grew up in Mississippi, and at 8 years old, my class went to a plantation, working plantation, and we were met by a white woman in a hoop skirt and all the little black kids. We weren't allowed to go into the house because how dare we? But we went around to the slave quarters, and the teacher looks at us, the white teacher looks at us, and she says, "See, children, your people were here and they were happy."
Wow.
So that's when I learned about, well, I guess that's when I learned about racism and my place. And to separate that away, that was 1979, 80, somewhere in there. And again, my mother was born in the Jim Crow South, and we were in Mississippi. So just a generation away from that. And as and when we go digging and when we're learning, especially around our season, when we're learning about stuff, education about our relationship with slavery and our past and what have you, especially in the South, a lot of that a lot of that history is sugar coated and whitewashed. Most of it is sugar coated and whitewashed, and it's kind of an interesting thing, especially because, Southern folks love to name things after things. And most of the important things in the South, especially when we were children, were named after Confederate soldiers and generals and such. I was born in a hospital named Jefferson Davis, but it's those subtle kind of reminders of that propaganda of your place that you as a white guy doesn't even register consciously, but it reaffirms the natural order of things.
I've always been extremely conscious of it, but what's interesting, um, I mean, again, if you look at sort of my current, like the more recent generation,
Mm-hmm.
basically, it's, I mean, this is a year ago. They're still calling it a farm.
Uh-huh.
Like, I mean, I get it.
Uh-huh.
What was,
But do you think that have they always referred to it as a farm?
yes.
And do you think that that is your family's way of trying to distance themselves away from the sordid part of their history?
I wouldn't phrase it that way, but yes. I
Okay.
don't necessarily know that because it's hard. It's not, I mean, this is something I've been grappling with since I was 6 years old.
Okay.
Um, so I mean, and it's been funny in more recent years, a lot of like so well, hell with it. A lot of the hand wringing I've seen a lot of white folks do in the past year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Even my reaction, I was just like, "Where y'all been?" um, I mean, this has been something I've been keenly aware of for most of my life. Um, so I mean, to bring it back, I do think it's confronting. I mean, I think it's very telling. Is it like some overt attempt to deny? I don't think there's anything overt about it. I think
Mm-hmm.
the whole other thing, I mean, it gets back to what you're saying. That's you have family and all the familial connections and all the societal connections. With all of that grabbed up, unless you really work at it, you're not gonna be like, okay, what they're reading about in the textbook, that's you.
Mm-hmm. That's who you are. That was your grandpa.
Yeah, and
I
I mean,
could take you to the house. Excuse me. But then it comes the conversation. Um, how do you navigate the relationship in your head, knowing that you actively know that your ancestors that owned people?
nuanced answer to this.
Okay.
Intentionally or no, my father was definitely treated like a second class citizen.
Okay.
Not the same, a
Nope.
little more similar than I think anyone wants to care to admit.
I will say this, I'm not going to discount the fact that your father was treated poorly, but what I am going to say is he had the currency of whiteness.
That is true. It
He
was
had the current, no matter how, and I'm not discounting anything about that. What I'm saying is your father had the currency of whiteness. And within a generation, no matter if he cleaned himself up, if he put on a shirt and tie or what have you, and he could float into polite society because of his currency of whiteness.
Mhm.
But
Oh,
I understand the story that you're telling, because I also understand the hard time that the poor white had in that particular time. But in order to keep them from banding with enslaved people, the US government gave them the currency of whiteness, and giving them such privileges, allowing them opportunity that the enslaved did not have, the currency of whiteness.
and it hasn't it been fascinating? Well, fascinating is one of the words, but hasn't it been fascinating to watch all of that basically play out again?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's
Like,
hilarious.
you're right. Like it's not analogous with the current culture. Like it's point A to point B.
Yep. So
Okay.
like, oh, we've seen this before. This is a tale as old as time.
So and like there's and so I mean the original question was sort of like having realized that what I did about it.
Well, no, how does that, because often I watch a shit ton of documentaries and I see like lynching photos, and in all of these lynching photos, there are these sea of white people smiling and looking at the camera. And I want to know what, like, you're walking, reading through this, and you see face to face, shit, that's my granddad. How does that feel?
It's pretty depressing. You know, I mean, my grandfather was magical. He was a pistol. In the same breath, the exact same breath. Um, he was a Navy vet, was one of the first people in submarines, and made no qualms about discussing what would happen to, you know, the token gay on the submarine. The same, no. Enough for a frame of reference, yes. And so it's interesting, like, to listen to you describe it, because I mean, I've seen all these dynamics play. I mean, we can get to more recent events later.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The I've seen all of this from a lot of different perspectives. Um, Sort of observing it and then trying to figure out where I fit into it all. And what's interesting is it's depressing, it's unsettling, it's disgraceful. Like the folks smiling as if they achieved some victory in those photos. I've seen them too. It's disgraceful. Where it's separate is it's, for me, it's only analogous at best. It's not my grandfather in the photo. And that always merits respect, always. And so yeah, it's all those things, I think. And I mean, I'm using very adult language, having thought about it a lot. I wouldn't like I didn't have the vocabulary or even concept of this back then.
Mm-hmm.
But how I got through it, and that's actually a good segue. There comes a certain amount of acceptance, I guess, that the hero of one person's story can certainly be the villains of others.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those are like, it's never that. Well, I'm not gonna say black and white. It's never that. Woo! There's
Well, there's a lot of intersectionality that exists in all of us, and you are correct. You can your ancestors, for you, they did what they did. You're here, but conversely, they did what they did. I'm here,
and that's
but on there's nothing that we can do
to change that, but we also cannot continue to ignore it and
Correct.
ignore the fact that because it happened, we are here.
Mm-hmm.
Because it happened and we didn't talk about it and we didn't deal with it, we're here in a flaming garbage fire that I turn on the news every morning and I'm all like, who's popped off this week? Who's shot up something? What white supremacist has done something? Who's like, I was watching the news this morning and there was a police chief of 33 years pulled a prank on a black officer by putting a police uniform on his police hazmat suit or something on his desk, and then instead of police on the back, he wrote Ku Klux Klan. This was a month or so ago, and then the chief, 33 years on the job, he says it was a joke that got out of control. No, it wasn't. And then you say to yourself, okay, he's been on the job for 33 years. How many people has he arrested? How many people has he sent to jail and or prison that claim to be innocent? Because they probably are. Maybe they are. Who knows? How much evidence did he plant? How many jokes did he pull that got out of hand that or went as planned? And then you think, well, why are the cops doing all of this? And then you go back and you think about the history of the cops, and then you think, well, the police came about as slave catchers. Police hosed people in 63 and 64 and 65 and 2020. But there were white supremacists walking down in full support with tiki torches in 17, and nothing really happened.
And yeah, that wasn't a joke.
Nothing really happened. People stormed the Capitol, but we're pretending like it didn't really happen. Our votes are being stripped away from everyone. Everyone. Unless you fit into the demographic. But race isn't a problem. Isn't that weird?
Oh,
Isn't that weird that we've been told that? Because you and I, granted, I am a whisper older than you. You and I grew up in the I don't see color. You remember this when you're like, I don't see color, I don't see race. We're all the same, blah, blah, blah. Why does it always have to be our race? So on and so forth. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're saying that everything's normal. And in America, normal is white.
yeah. The whole don't you know
It's just white.
go to your place thing. Well, like what's been like I want to share a little bit about even as a kid, I was very fortunate for this, is unlike a lot of people in a similar demographic.
Okay.
I actually spent some time in like predominantly African American areas in our hometown, which was actually pretty rare.
How did that come about?
So I before I ever cooked, before I ever wrote, before I ever did anything else, I sang. I was in a pretty high level boys choir
Okay.
area. And our peak were up there with Harlem. So we toured, we went to Europe, we did all of this, and it was a little bit of a cross section of everyone in in the city. So that was probably, not counting school, because that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have time for that.
It's just that's a garbage fire. The education system in this country is a fucking freak show unless you can pay for it. But go on.
the quick version of the point there is it didn't actually encourage people actually doing essentially what you and I are doing
Right, I know.
now, which is a tragedy. So, but that was really where, it was taking one, and he's still he's family at this point. Like, um, either having folks over for Christmas dinner or going to pick up or something up at their house, or like errand running. Or in our teens, we would ride with Torrance and we would go wherever we would go. And, Torrance was still among my favorite teachers of all time. Because he's both A, extremely protective of me, and then B, and this has imparted a lesson that I've applied in many different realms ever since. But basically the idea of not knowing better. If you don't know better, then you don't know better. And it takes a lot of grace and patience, but that's what that is, an opportunity to teach. Now, been taught and it is established that on some level you know better, and then you still do thoughtless, mindless, white privilege crap, then all bets are off.
All bets are off.
Rightly so. And I never needed the all bets are off moment, because I had a desire to. I didn't want to be part of, I couldn't help I was part of something. And A, that's not a reason to dodge responsibility. B, I think also having a lot of guilt about it is the easiest way to do the same damn thing. Like, that's why the hand wringing gets on my nerves. I was like, yeah.
Or you could do something.
Right.
Or you could do something.
Then you could do something. And at that point, I was young. So the biggest thing for me was to learn. And it wasn't so much that I don't see color. That was the concept, like, and I'm clip noting a lot here, but the basic idea was they're differences, but they only make as many as you let them. And it's an opportunity to learn.
No, go on.
So that was one really big influence, because I also just had exposure. And so there wasn't anything, I didn't always understand something. I might have said something, the microaggressions is what I might have said something thoughtless, not knowing any better. I quickly, I learned fast, because it was never. But part of it is just the willingness to get in there and sort that out, essentially. And I did find I do find on a whole, like, an unwillingness to let that happen. For me, I was just watching.
I think that it's a lot to do with people are scared of, a lot of people don't like looking stupid. And part of getting to know any person, you're gonna look stupid. And you're gonna say shit, because if I've never encountered someone from your culture, your background, I may say something that is questionable. Probably not offensive, but it might be questionable. And in that moment, I freely tell people every time, I've never met anyone from your background before. So if I say anything that's, red flaggy, please let me know, because it's not my intention. That's my disclaimer to everyone I meet from a different culture than mine. And I've put my foot in my mouth a lot of times in my life with lots and lots and lots of, not with white folks, I don't give a shit about that. But I'm being quite honest. I feel like I know everything I need to know about y'all. And we grew up in the same country, and you don't know shit about me. Fuck you. Fuck you. And but not in that flippant sort of a way. It's all like, oh, sweetie, no, you should know better. You should absolutely know better. And if I'm the one to tell you this, consider yourself lucky, because I could choose not to. And then you get punched in the face. However, I choose to share my information because I'm more concerned for the person who would punch you in the face. I'm not concerned for you. I'm concerned for the person who will punch you in the face, because I don't want them to get arrested. So that's where my thought process is. And I think that a lot of us have affinity bias. So most of our comfort level is surrounded by people who look like us, act like us, think like us, eat like us, laugh like us, find the thing. It's so boring. It's so boring. And now, when you left South Carolina, did you then go to New Orleans?
Yeah, before we get to that, there was one other thing, and it's actually one of the most important pieces of my childhood as it relates to this.
Ooh, come back. Yes.
And it's not so much describing the problem. I mean, we both have plenty of frame of reference, you know, right? But this is what actually made the most difference for me. And it's one of my favorite stories to tell.
Okay.
So in that same group we sang with, Marla Millette, she's incredible. Incredible.
Okay.
The her sister was getting married. And so she invited our family and another white family to come. And we like, without hesitancy, said yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it was funny, like there's racism as like an outside concept. You're kind of like, in terms of like what that meant for me personally in my own little world, beyond like the history and what my heritage was and all the rest, it was like, this is not fair in the grand scheme of things, but just to own it, it was sort of quicksand that everyone needed to wade through that no one really wanted to, so we could all do what we wanted to do in the first fucking place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so we go to that wedding. We didn't hesitate to say yes. And then we get there and A, we don't know anybody.
Okay.
And then B, let's state the obvious, we were the only white people there.
Uh-huh.
On top of the fact we only knew the hostess, and of course she's gonna be running all over the place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we're all at a table at ourselves. And there's like layers to this. Cause like on one level, the real racist asshole's like, oh, I'm sorry, I have other plans, or you know, something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But
then there also comes a case of, because there's all of this there, breaking the ice to break through that, it's a hurdle. And so we all sat there at the table and we're chatting, and I will never, the way Marlon handled this is what I will remember for the rest of my life, because it became a template for how to be the other. Because as I've gotten older, I'm always the token something. It just depends which something. And so I really, like legit, like it was, and so Marlon comes up and she grabs a chair and she sits down and she goes, excuse me a minute while I desegregate this table. And I mean, we all roared laughing. And then as the story goes, that's all it took to break the ice.
Mm-hmm.
And introduced us to a few people. We had an amazing time. And
Mm-hmm.
that most people in our demographic, to euphemism, don't get a chance to experience. And that was a gift.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about what I love about how she handled that was there was no sugarcoat. It was acknowledging the situation very directly without judgment,
Mm-hmm.
with a degree of appreciating the irony of it all, and then also giving space for something else to open up, which is something I've seen largely absent in kind of the current climate. Like, there was actually space to like grow into that. And it became one of my favorite memories. And then also for me, whatever token thing I was in any particular social situation,
Mm-hmm.
so it became my default for how I handle those situations. Speaking hetero, like that was actually, I kind of missed the days I had to do that all the time.
That's a really good way of diffusing a situation with such humor. Years ago, I used to live in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out one night and talking to people, and they were like, hey, Jonathan, yes, we're all going out on a boat. You want to go boating with us? And I said, well, after that long voyage, Black people don't like large bodies of water. no one knew exactly how to digest that statement, except for one person who laughed his ass off. And he and I are still really good friends because he understood what I was trying to do.
Yeah, it is fascinating, particularly in the current climate. Like, that approach is something out of fashion, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
What I loved about it, though, is it actually kind of created space that people could actually, I mean, certainly learn in an abstract sense, but at the end of the day, we were there to celebrate a wedding and meet some people and have a good time. And that,
you laughed.
yeah,
Everyone laughed, and everybody like, you're, oh, I can relax.
talk about it in a way that doesn't, like, this is like sign language for uselessness to me.
Mm-hmm.
Really,
I'm gonna keep an eye on that.
Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
The and I mean that it was funny. I was just at a cookout yesterday, and somebody was more so later on in my life, that they were like, well, you're in a lot of different communities all at the same time. And I was like, the term intersectionality didn't, it's not normally applied to someone that looks like me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even a concept to begin with, but it was, for me, I wasn't really, I certainly, whether you can argue, I was in maybe the abstract sense, but on a one-on-one level, like, I was kind of a man without a tribe.
Okay.
And so, if I didn't really belong anywhere, then anywhere I was about as good as anywhere else, was sort of my logic to it. And so, I mean, the gift of that is, it can be very confusing accommodating that many different worldviews simultaneously. I don't need to explain that to you.
Mm-hmm.
That part of it sucks. On the bright side, I can actually bring people together in a way that, is far more rare, and I actually got acknowledged for this randomly. I wasn't even on this topic. And for me, that's always been my default. And I mean, as I got older, like right before I went to New Orleans, as I was losing weight, one thing I became very aware of, I don't think it's a one-to-one direct link, but definitely there comes a point where you realize I wanted to change my life.
Okay.
That's always been kind of the running undercurrent from certainly this conversation, obesity, trauma, all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I realized was that the socioeconomic background, like the world I grew up in, I don't necessarily think it was the cause, but it's so entwined with my experience of life. If I wanted to change my life, and I mean, it's something that Torrance and Ms. Millette taught me. You get outside your traditional sphere. And I mean, that was actually one of the reasons only 6% of people who lose more than 30 pounds keep it off within 3 years. I'm at year 15 now.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was one of the reasons why was pretty much, was like, okay, my brain is not my friend, and there's all this different programming, and God knows I've had an education in that since I was a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, right. I mean, I was aware. Doesn't mean I was, poster child for wokeness, I guess they would call. I mean, part of my awareness was realizing how much I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have to go hand in hand. But that was basically my winning strategy, was pretty much anything, any group or any play or any activity that was as least likely I should be, I would do. That was how I got into cooking and eventually became a chef. My idea of cooking was ordering 2 large pizzas. Talk about white privilege.
Yeah. No, that's just garbage living. I'm sorry, garbage choices.
No offense, but I mean, I actually had the means to do that, which kind of makes
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, that's white privilege, but the choices are gross.
Right. But
I had an ex-roommate who would do that. He would order 3 large pizzas every night and eat them.
It's a miserable life.
It was a miserable. I wish him well.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. Oh, come on, Southern bitch.
Oh, classes. I laugh. Last time I went to North Carolina, they were like, "Do you use Duke's mayonnaise? Like, you can make pimento cheese?" I'm like, "The hell do they teach y'all anymore? Jesus." I've got a Puerto Rican woman in Queens that knows bless your heart usage better than you guys at this point.
Right?
They need to come back and teach classes. I mean, y'all seem to be keeping all the crap and not all the things that were actually worth
Not all the things that are lovely about being Southern. Like throwing the most excellent shade and people not knowing it until 2 days later. You're like, that bitch just told me off. But
or the New York equivalent, that's so sweet of you. When I'm really pissed off, I combine the two. I'm like, oh, bless your heart, that's so sweet of you. You know, or the way I do it anyway. But but it was the you know, I mean, that was the gift that Marlon and Torrance gave me, was the willingness and the understanding and the concept to be able to be socially, culturally, economically mobile and still stay true to myself. I mean, and that was the other kind of big childhood thing that I learned. And I mean, it was more so by example than explicitly. It actually was explicitly I was in this is a privilege. I was at a pizza joint in Brooklyn, and I just wound up in conversation with a woman that marched in Selma.
wow.
And we traded notes. I mean, it was a great conversation, but the biggest takeaway from that particular conversation was the sentence, and it's one that's been sort of like the life lesson. And it just, I've never heard someone verbalize it so directly. And it was basically, you know, in terms of protest, like, how do you do that? And it was essentially what she said was, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who they are or what they've done or what they've not done or what they could do but not. All of that, at the end of the day, all that matters is who you are. Sorry.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's a beautiful statement.
That has been that's always been kind of imparted in principle, but I never had someone phrase it that directly. And, you know, I mean, that was the, you know, I mean, to me, that's the heart of it. Now, New Orleans, that was interesting. Because at this point, I'd had a pretty good education, and then it's been then to get into the deep South. And pertinent to this, two very interesting things to come out of that. I'm trying to think of which one I will leave. First one, I'll do the first one quick because it's a quick anecdote. There was a gentleman that was trying to sell me a vase with a hole in the bottom of it. Okay. And I was like, I mean, I realize I'm not from here, but baby, that don't make me stupid. Because anytime they see someone that's not New Orleanian, they're like, "Who, easy break." And he just looked for a while, and then he said something. I'll never forget my reaction. He looked at me. He's like, "You're very comfortable around Black people," and my reaction was a collusion of emotions. I don't know if I can fully explain, but I'll try. I was offended. Not that I was offended that he just saw what I looked. You know, he didn't see who was. I don't mean it in that sense. I was actually offended on his behalf. Because my response was, last time I checked, y'all don't bite. I was like, what the hell you think of? You allow yourself to think of yourself that way. Like I mean, that was very not a Miss Millette type of philosophy. But I remember being struck by that because I was like, I mean, he meant it as a sincere compliment. So it wasn't like I went at him. But it was more, I just was taken aback. I was like, I mean, y'all don't, I mean, why wouldn't I? And I mean that, because I mean, the culture there, that has a whole other, everything was sort of hidden by niceties. I mean, intention, it's not, well, in some cases intentionally. In other cases, it was too scary to confront. You know, when I was talking about old South and Deep South before, it's a lot more intense in New Orleans. But I just remember, like, like, that was not a sentence I was expecting to hear. Because, I mean, we were just having, I mean, it all began, mind you, with him trying to sell me a vase in the hole in the middle of it. And I mean, that's sort of that's one of the blessings of hopping around a lot of different communities at one point or another. Like a lot of, like, things that would mean a whole lot to somebody don't actually mean that much to me. Or I don't have a value judgment against, well, let me rephrase it. I mean, it doesn't stop me from connecting with people as people. That might be a more accurate way to say it. You know, I mean, to me, that's from from my childhood brain, there was, I mean, I can't fix institutional law.
Well, we do that with votes, and it takes
We can,
forever. And
but
yeah,
for me, it was always a day-to-day reality of like, how do you deal with this here in the moment? And in the moment, on a one-on-one level, can't do anything about that right away. You know, giving people grace and dignity, and if there's something to learn, you do that. If you have disagreements, you work it out. I mean, basically, you know, essentially making sure the way I was raised to treat white people actually gets applied to everyone.
like treat everyone exactly like you were taught to treat white folks. Yeah, that would make life so much easier. Or
And
just treat everyone like a human, period.
and that's why, again, I'm as critical of the hand wringing as I am anything else, because to me, that's just the flip side of the same coin. Um, because I've never, I call Miss Millette a lot of things. Victim is not one of them. You know, and that and so I mean that to me, that's where all that stuff gets so dangerous. Even if people mean well, it's extremely dangerous because it actually is only perpetuating what we're all trying to move past in the first place.
Well, it's because that's the only idea or the only image that you have in your head based on the information that you've decided to learn by whatever means necessary. So if your only interaction with Black and brown folks is the news or something CNN is telling you or what have you, and you don't interact with Black people or Latin people or Asian people on an everyday basis, if your circle of influence it looks exactly like you and it thinks exactly like you, you're not going to know what the life of another person is like. You have nothing but speculation to base that on, and your speculations are usually based in stereotypes and coded language that the news tells you.
And what's amazing, like, even from my perspective and vantage point, trying to break through that.
It's really not that difficult. I swear to God, it's not. Now that moment you're talking about being being a white face in a mostly Black space, my partner has that happen to him a lot. One instance in particular is when I took him down to Mississippi, and he's sitting in the middle of a restaurant in Jackson, Mississippi, on the Black part of town. And here he is, he's walking in, tall, thin, beautiful white guy, me, my family, my sisters, my mom, just everybody's there. The waitresses are Black, the cooks are, everybody's Black. He walks in, he's just looking, just having a good old time, smiling and laughing. And after a while, because people are like, oh. But then after a while, they didn't care. Everybody had just a great time. We had a wonderful time. He's all like, ooh, what is this? I was like, flavor. And then he loved it. No, you know. He is also from Carolina, to be honest. He's from North Carolina.
Oh no, now see, my mother's family comes from South Carolina. I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina.
And he was born in, well, he wasn't born, he was raised in Asheboro, North Carolina.
Okay. Right. I mean, for me, the North Carolina chapter of my life, other than the accent and sometimes when I make them into teas, like that chapter's been so thoroughly read and closed. When people ask me where I'm from, I normally say New Orleans, mainly because Louisiana destroyed my accent. It really did. What was interesting though was now when I was in New Orleans, this was after my mom died, my father's mother died. I left my job in newspapers to keep an eye on my dad to the extent to which was possible.
Okay.
And meanwhile, I had also just lost 100 pounds. I was dealing with my own Me Too stuff. there was a lot going on. And I went to New Orleans to rebuild with Katrina and just felt I've never been a big partier, but I felt an affinity with that city. And with what money I had left, I started my first media company and went off on my own and had some successes, ran out of capital, and was on the streets for about 6 months.
Okay.
And I bring all that up because on the pit stop, on the way up, I got a sort of the PhD level of, or sorry, the master's version of like, a lot of people call it intersectionality. Sometimes I call it being caught square in the middle.
Okay.
My life was in ruins. And at the same time, my job was still going on. I was still talking people out of killing themselves. Because, I mean, it was, when you deal with weight, you deal with a lot of different things, and they're all very different. And on one level, my life, particularly at that point, in theory, I was in no position to support anybody. But then you're there in the moment and your back's against the wall. And at the end of the day, it goes back to who you are. And there's no force in heaven, earth, or hell that would let me allow that to happen. So I just kind of found it within myself. But needless to say, all of that took an extreme toll. And two things with that. I mean, I do think race and class get very collapsed with each other. And I also remember it was a little bit like the plantation realization back when I was a little kid, when realizing poverty was me.
Yes.
Wasn't the person I signed the check for, wasn't the person I volunteered for, wasn't the person.
You.
It was me.
Yes. That
was a very sobering day. And two things got me through it. There was at one point in the worst of New Orleans, Mavis Staples' Will Never Turn Back album.
Okay.
Was the only CD in my on my person. And it was fascinating to hear. This was like, late Obama era, this post Katrina, to hear all of the civil rights anthems being redone in a modern context, particularly in that city. So there's just that. Then, I was somebody I hardly claimed, I will never claim to be some expert on civil rights history, but I know my share. But that album in particular had that all come alive for me in a way that I never could relate to emotionally before, even being someone that had a sense of his role and a desire to get through it. I recommend that album to everybody. But there's a line where it says, down in Mississippi, if you go hunting rabbits, you'll go to jail, but season was always open on me. And that hit, particularly in the circumstances I was in, that hit me like a bullet. Because it's one thing to be like, yes, I hate to put it so gauchely, but yes, posing people bad. How my family treated people historically for economic gain bad. I mean, doesn't take a huge amount of mental process to thank you, right?
Right.
It's a whole other, and I just remember sitting there, I was like, to deal with the fact that a rabbit has more rights than you. I never had that brought a grit to that whole education I've been describing to you. I took that education to a whole other level. And then also looking at my own circumstances, I remember saying, and the thing I love about Mavis Staples is for all the stuff that she and her family went through, and they had to share. I mean, they were in the thick of it. Ever destroy her.
No.
Ever. And I remember, sorry.
No, there's something about the sound of her voice that it just adds to. No matter what she's going through it, you hear it in her voice. It just makes her better.
And I remember sitting there, and that was the realization. I was like, it's like, that was the thing. I was like, for all, I mean, it's not that everything I knew before was trash, but it's just, again, on a whole other level. Like that was a moment. And then the follow-up to that realization was, if she can get through that, then I can get through this. I don't care what it takes. And, she is still my guiding light and has been ever since. What was interesting, though, was in New Orleans, there was always great gospel around. Like growing up singing, I was in a different church every Sunday also. So I didn't have like a home church. I was kind of in all of them and kind of learned to function within all of them. So, I mean, I was somewhat versed, but gospel was always around, and Torrance and Treese is why, thank God. And this was kind of a pit stop on the way to New York. Took me to Mount Olive, AME Zion, and I will sing their praises for the rest of my life. Because I went in, and again, yes, everyone is a child of God. That is, that's how churches work. It's a whole other thing. It's also a community.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to me, it was like Southern hospitality to the nth degree. I was fully aware that I was a guest there. Okay, you get me.
I do.
That always merits respect, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I didn't need anyone to school me on that at that point. And we went through service, and this was just before I went to New York, and the entire congregation came up and blessed me. And that is why I will sing their praises for the rest of my life. I will never forget that moment. Here's where it gets really interesting. Following that up, one of my white friends invited me to their church. And this is where I learned what microaggressions were.
Okay.
I was chatting with folks after in the fellowship, and I just met a random stranger, and she was complaining about her church. And I was like, well, what don't you like about it? And she was listening to this and listening to this and listening to this. I was like, as she got on, it became very clear to me she wanted to be in Black church. I was like, I mean, very, like, it wasn't even me making some grand gesture. I was like, well, I'm here for a little while longer. Why don't you come with me to Mount Olive, AME Zion? I was like, this is a lot more your speed. And her response was, oh, I don't think I would feel comfortable with that. And I remember, like, my reaction, my knee-jerk reaction was like, oh, that's what that is. Like, I grew up in North Carolina. I understand passive aggressive. I never fully understood how passive aggressive and microtransgressions were. But I was like, that's what they mean.
You're like, oh, that's what those are. Oh,
like, I understood passive aggressive very clearly.
Yeah.
It was interesting, the getting kind of deeper in being in a lot of different communities, the pinpointing the code. Like, I understood the gay version of that. It was interesting getting better and better well-versed in a variety of different codes.
There are many different dialects. You should speak them all.
I've got my share.
Yeah, there's many dialects. The most elusive is rich white woman. That's the one that it's a nuance, like, oh, you're so precious. I couldn't possibly. I would never. I don't even know what to wear. It's a special one.
Oh, I survived them. I know enough to be able to survive.
Yes, it's a special one.
But it was once I moved to New York, it has been fascinating. No, well, I don't know if fascinating is the right word. It's been very enlightening, seeing the experiences when the tables turn up here. It's a very different experience.
What do you mean?
Meaning, there was New Orleans was intense, but I always describe it to New Yorkers if you take all of New York and shove it in the size of Brooklyn.
Yeah, that feels right.
It's about so it's all the same things, just more intense and in a smaller geographic area. So everyone's in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture is built around, to the degree it does, making that work.
Mm-hmm.
Here, everyone is very far more, everyone's in their own little spot. And so actually a lot of the things I was very, I'm saying this with my tongue in cheek a little bit, I was very privileged to have a kind of a education, sort of proto intersectionality. That doesn't really exist here.
It does not.
And it was the and on one level, there's the amount to which I was an easy target. Well, I was it was interesting. Like the most. Oh, Siri decided she wants to chip in. I thought I put everything on D&D. I spent about a year and a half in Brownsville, and originally I was supposed to be in East New York, and and then I wound up in Brownsville. And my building, and this is where I kind of think of this as sort of like the third stage of my education. I like that was to this day. I mean, I was dodging stabbings. People were regularly telling me they didn't like white people. I was like, I understand. There were barbershops that did not want me to get my hair cut there. And my knee-jerk reaction, I wasn't offended. I mean, trust me, I got it on one level. On another, my most immediate response was, that's what that feels like. Noted. You know, I had helped open up a cafe there, and my bosses were wonderful to work for. They very much did not like gay or white people, but they were excellent bosses. And it was funny, and then for all I'm describing, me and my building, we were family. And it was particularly for the more elderly members, they were like, oh, can you get me some cigarettes? Can you get me some ice cream? So I would go to the nearest bodega, and they would always charge me about $2 to $3 more. And I came back, and then she's like, and this, you know, she gave me all the correct change. I was like, well, you know, I was like, I had the cash to cover it. They're like, well, that's not what it cost. And then she went herself later, and it cost what she thought it would cost. And we got to the point we started jokingly calling it the white tax.
Yeah, that feels right.
Yep. And what was funny, and I mean, it's interesting to be on, because you get to see how all of this begins. It wasn't that I was white per se, except that I was a cop.
Really?
Yep. Once they realized I was actually in the neighborhood, then they charged me the correct pricing. And the first thing I did is I sprinted to the building, and everyone's on the stoop. I'm like, guys, guess what? What? They're like, what? They're like, they charged me the right price. I was like, I've escaped the white tax. And Stephanie was like, you graduated. And I was for a boy whose family grew up in the plantation, I fled them my damn self and graduated out of the white tax. It is not the James Beard or Pulitzer. It does not make me the patron role model for how all white people should be. On the other hand, that's a hell of a journey, and I'm proud of it all the same.
I get you. You.
And what was interesting was and then with everything I just described, I rolled my own cigarettes, as you may or may not remember, and I sat at on the outskirts of the park, because I was tired, because I'd walked God knows how long, and a cop stopped me, and then they realized it wasn't weed, it was tobacco, and then they gave me the "Are you sure you're in the right place?" on speech, and it kind of put the whole thing a little capstone. I mean, I just and it was kind of funny. I've been listening to one way or the other, a lot of different sort of stump speeches and talking points. And what was interesting about that experience was not everyone is right. But I also begin to see, okay, all right, I'm starting to understand how people draw that conclusion there, how people draw that conclusion there. Even the richest white people in New Orleans are scared of the police down there. So, I mean, that wasn't a foreign concept to me, but it also, how poignant that was in the midst of it. Fully understanding people had a lot of anger towards white people, but also having no frame of reference for relating to them as a neighbor. And I mean, it was in seeing all of that play out almost simultaneously. And then, yes, I graduated the white tax, but here's the flip side of that too. We're all out on the stoop. I mean, you know, we cooked. I mean, it really was like living in 227. Like, I could not have been lucky. But, I mean, we all looked out for each other. God knows they looked after me.
That's amazing.
It was a gift. And, you know, there comes a point where, yes, I graduated the white tax. On the other hand, here's a little dose of reality. So don't get it too twisted, basically.
I still think you should be paid. You should have still paid the white tax, but that's just my personal opinion. But go on.
I graduated.
Reparations. Go on. I'm just saying.
But there was It wasn't someone in the building. It was, I believe it was a child of somebody of theirs, like a friend of a friend's child. And child came up to me and she's like, or we kept on saying, we're going to break into the school and steal all the candy. And I didn't actually I didn't hear it at first. And then I heard it, but it wasn't sinking in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kid said it about 3 times because he just thought I wasn't understanding. He thought, he was like, yeah, we're going to go in the school or go in, break into school or break in and steal all the candy. And then it kind of also dawned on me that at the end of the day, this was a pit stop for me. That was not my day-to-day life. And I will be grateful. And I'm doing there are a lot funnier stories of just part of it was for us, how we kind of became a family unit is we didn't even try to bridge the divide. We just sort of delighted at the irony of the situation and kept what was important. And then also was, even if somebody loaned me a quarter, I would treat it like somebody was giving me a seed funding round for $3 million. And that was actually beyond just being nice. That's how I got their respect. It could be 3 million, it could be a damn quarter. It didn't make a difference to me. But within all of that, it was a pit stop for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the dose of reality that I got a definite slice of a very particular world that very few people, especially from my background, are able to function within, B, much less learn. And I did both. I'm very proud of that, but I also don't ever mistake that for, I joke about graduating out of the white tax, but to me, that line with that child was the dividing line. And that merits a respect too. And I think that's really, that's kind of where, in my experience of it all, in terms of kind of striking that balance. Because I've had some folks tell me I have soul and always laugh. I'm like, that may be true, but I'm still white. And there's always it doesn't require hand wringing. It doesn't require sobbing and tearing at your clothes. Because again, all of that doesn't actually help anybody.
You're not doing anything but making this awkward situation even more awkward, making me now have to be concerned about your poor, unfortunate hands and not the injustices that I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that was that, and that really, particularly in the past 2 years, that's the education I got in Brownsville is something I've been going back to again and again, because whether it was me and weight loss, I reckon, I've made peace with family and most of them have passed now. For all intents and purposes, at 300 pounds, I was most likely to be a suicide statistic. If you look at me on paper, that wasn't me. My life crashed financially in every other way in New Orleans, and I rebuilt myself from scratch. And a lot of that came from the lessons I learned from Torrance and Miss Millette and Mavis Staples and every damn body in Brownsville. That's a debt. But within that, my whole life has been about trying to find ways to move things forward, which is why I was so excited about having this conversation. It's not about me being right about my astute assumptions or observations. What I've seen in the past 2 years scares me.
Because it's terrifying.
It's terrifying, but then also I've not the opportunities for a way out of it or beyond it. All I've seen is aggression, and it's fully understood, and I respect why. But where I've always been looking for, whether it was my own life or as it applies to this, is none of us built the cycle, but we're all tangled in it one way or the other. We all pay for it, but how do you actually move forward?
You know what the difference is? I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm going to. The difference is we are playing this game of a zero sum in the idea that if we make it equal, somebody has to lose. So if I'm able to stand on the same footing and have the same economic experiences and have the same whatever as a white person with the same background, with the same what have you, without all of the obstacles that have been placed in front of my ancestors. That doesn't take anything away from your whiteness, doesn't take anything away from anything. But what usually happens is, because of that affinity bias, I could be a white man in an office and a black man in the office, and that white guy, because his bosses are white and his bosses are white and their bosses are white, he's going to move up that corporate ladder much faster. He's going to have more opportunities much faster because of he may not be the best, but he's just like everyone else. So I'm skipping my point, but the point of the matter is, just because we are all fair, we make everything fair and equal for all of us, doesn't take anything away. But what it does force everyone to do is compete on an equal playing field.
Oh, I'm with you there. Let me how do I put this? So much of what I've seen, especially just in New York in general, everyone's kind of hunkered in their corner in their battle stations.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own life, for all the things I do and don't know, the one thing that I definitely took to heart and been able to make some unlikely results come out of was the willingness to actually talk and learn from other people. And what concerns me with like the environments for that to occur, because the like they're battles that need to be fought right now. That's why I'm having such a hard time articulating this, because I don't want to imply that they shouldn't. But then also on a day-to-day level, there needs to be some space for the ability to connect with people as people. And I'm worried about what the ramifications will be if everyone still stays so entrenched. Because I mean, particularly in New York, because it's so segmented. Does that like?
Yeah, the ramifications would be if we don't continue, I'm sorry, if we don't open dialogue between rooting factions, if you were, if we don't open dialogue, nothing really is it's going to get worse. Because the minute something is implemented that benefits Black people, that benefits Indigenous people, that benefits Latinx people, the white people who are not at the table will assume that that takes benefits away from you, which will then, malicious. There was a militia somewhere in fucking Michigan or something that hijacked the highway. They all didn't get shot.
You know, it was the biggest
sheer caucasity. But yeah.
Well, it's actually funny. The biggest eye opener to me and more recent, like I said, a lot of the conversations I've been hearing, I've had a variation for some time. What the biggest eye opener to me of the recent sort of cultural wars, for want of a better description of them, how much all of this is centered in the Midwest. That was the big eye opener. Well, then, yeah, I mean, particularly in my life, I mean, I literally come from an epic plantation. Like that's where my brain's gonna go. And that was the most interesting education to me, was to get a better sense of just how widespread a lot of things that were traditionally applied to being sort of particularly Southern aren't at all.
Those people move.
That was the biggest eye opener to me.
It is no longer a Southern white thing. This is not only national, it's also international, because concurrent here, there are rises in far right groups and white nationalism happening in Germany, and they're happening in the UK, and they're happening all over the planet.
And so, I mean, that's My brain immediately went to Britain because that's the most international politics I'm the most familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, but I mean, it's largely in the past couple of years have been largely playing referee. The particular or ambassador. My favorite Facebook exchanges are the white folks, not always Southern, but that are basically start talking about reverse racism. I'm like, all right, hold up, wait. And I actually want to share this with you because I would love feedback on the way I break it down.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, first of all, there's racism, there's prejudice, and there's discrimination, and then there's just straight up trauma. Everyone has their prejudices. Everyone has reasons, like that's, or affinity bias is another term for it in my mind. They mean the same thing to me. That's one thing. Discrimination is a whole other ball of wax. That's something baked in institutional within laws. That's structural. Racism is all of that combined, and then on top of it, add 400 years to it. So, I mean, you can say that you might not like someone's prejudices. Yeah, I'll leave those debates, but don't say it's racist. I mean, that's, to me, I look at, well, before I go on, I mean, what do you like? That was the best quick notes version of how I could break it down. But no, racism doesn't. No, like people can be prejudiced, but that's a just distinct thing from discrimination and racism.
My personal opinion is there's no goddamn thing as reverse racism. You sound stupid. That's usually what I say. But I preface it with racism is a system of power and authority. Black people in this country have no power and authority. Thereby, we can't be racist. We can be prejudiced. We can't be racist.
So I was about close.
Yeah, you're about there, but reverse racism is a dog whistle that white nationalists use to elicit, like, it's like a dog whistle to elicit like this fear of erasing white culture.
No, you're right. From my perspective, I mean, part of it was all of the dodging cards in the intersection.
Yeah, it's all stupid. You're like you explain that to me, because every time I've asked somebody to explain reverse racism to me, what they're explaining is affirmative action, and what I have to explain to them is affirmative action has benefited white women more so than anyone else.
Funny always how it can work that way, doesn't it? I mean, I think it's more in. I mean, a lot of it, and this is why I try to do the delicate explanation.
Well, you can.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
that I feel like when white folks speak to white folks about this, you have a language that you speak to white folks in that although I know how to speak it, I have no interest in that language anymore, because my people have negotiated your feelings at the expense of our own for 400 plus years, and I have no interest in participating in that mindset any longer.
oh, I get it. I mean, I also from my I'm always very sensitive to people that slip through the cracks.
I get that.
Like, and also for me, it's very much my pay it forward for all the people that taught me. I want to, same deal as I learned a long time ago. Give an opportunity, teach, give them the opportunity, and if then they F it up, then what I mean. What, because it's a whole other level of righteous fury if you've put in the effort to try to make a change.
Yeah.
Then I have to, but I mean, what I see, like what I often see. I mean, yes, there's malicious on one end. Then there's also the folks that just don't know any better because all they know is what they hear and see on TV. That's not a baton. I think you're right. Like there's been subjugating feelings long enough. At the same time, trying to find some way to provided better understanding to people that are frankly kind of caught up in a system and don't know any better. I think it's worth a try.
It's worth a try, and I applaud you for it. That is you doing your due diligence to make sure that your other white brethren understand the toxicity of their actions.
Well, half the time they didn't understand the toxicity of them to me, but it's worth a shot. That's the only way I know to make.
And I applaud you for doing that, and I thank you for having this chat with me.
You're very welcome.
I appreciate it, and I'm a better person for having talked with you today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It was I appreciate the relief.
It's, this conversation, I know that just saying these things out loud can be a little uncomfortable, but so what? So what? And then the opportunity for me is the reason why I started this podcast, and I'll be sending you all the links so you can share it far and wide. It'll be on Spotify and it'll be everywhere. But the idea is hearing you and I have this conversation, watching us have this conversation, it may inspire someone else to have a conversation much like this and open up their perspective.
Well, it's that's my hope. That's the only way I know to the future's up for grabs right now, is the way I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say relieved, it was like I've dealt with plenty of uncomfortable in my time.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been, I've had a lot of different experiences that aren't particularly common for folks that look like me, and no outlet to put them to any positive use whatsoever. And so I deeply appreciate the opportunity to do that.
It is my sincere pleasure.
You're very welcome. So that's my hope for anyone hearing this. There's my guiding light is, it doesn't matter who they are. What matters is who you are. But I also always believe there is a better way. And I just hoping that this will help all of us find that together.
Yeah, because again, we can't fix a problem we're afraid to talk about.
Right.
And do you have anything to plug before we're done?
No, I am. I'm up to writing and cooking. The pandemic's been sort of a new lease on life, and this has kind of been a part of that as well. So I'm in the process. I'm always doing food and media work in some capacity. So kind of have a new concept coming up, but same basic idea. I want to keep looking for ways. I don't want to say bring us all together because that's so loaded at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always my aspiration to create something new that everyone can feel genuinely a part of. I normally try to do that through food and cooking. That's, I'm clear that's the goal. What form that takes, that depends on a few other conversations, but I'll keep at it.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Russ.
You are very, very welcome. You have a wonderful day, okay?
You also.
Alrighty.
Bye.